One thing I can tell people pretty confidently is if you have a one-party, completely partisan bill like that's reforming student loans, it's not going to last very long because it's all done by one party with no bipartisan consensus. So that means that like borrowers are faced with like more uncertainty than they ever really have been. And I would just suggest that borrowers just sort of like try to stay calm through the storm.
Hey, journeyers. Welcome to the Journey to Launch podcast. Today, I have Travis Hornsby, who is the founder of Student Loan Planner, and he launched it after helping his physician wife navigate a ridiculously complex student loan repayment decision. To date, Student Loan Planner, his company, has consulted on over $4 billion in student loan debt, and I'm pretty sure you did a few, I don't know how many thousands but of journeyers, so of people that I've sent to you to get just advice, because I just think you're really skilled and knowledge in this area. And so Travis has been on the podcast a few times before, and I thought it'd be a really great time to have him back, because every time you've come on, you've provided clarity about student loans and, options for people to pay them back. But things have been changing. Things are different a little bit. And so I wanted you to come back on the podcast in real time, hopefully to help some people out to understand what's going on in the student loan environment. So welcome back to the podcast, Travis.
Thank you for having me.
So I don't know where to start, but maybe a good place is to orient everyone from maybe what has changed recently or what's different maybe from the last times you've been on the podcast, which was a couple years ago, to now, and what's going on.
Yeah, so the Biden administration came out with cancellation and the SAVE plan. That was his signature effort at helping student loan borrowers, right? Both of those, it looks like, are going to fail because the SAVE plan is going to get overturned for sure. Just depends on who has the murder weapon, right? Like game of Clue, like who done it, right? Like the only question about when the SAVE plan will end is who's going to kill it. And then cancellation, of course, got killed by the Supreme Court. So like the two big things the Biden administration tried to do on student loans are going to be dead. The one thing that the Biden administration did do on student loans was the IDR account adjustment and the PSLF waiver. And what that did is just got people closer to forgiveness if you were going for forgiveness. So that, knock on wood, is still hanging around. So borrowers now are being asked to repay for the first time in like 5 years. So, basically during COVID, like there was the pause, right? Pause interest, pause payments. And they said, hey, payments are restarting, but they actually didn't enforce any kind of like collections or default like management stuff. They just sort of said, hey, pay, but we're not going to do anything to you if you don't pay. Well, the Trump administration just announced, as of already now in May, when we're recording this, that they are garnishing people, withholding benefits, garnishing tax refunds, garnishing wages. So student loans are on again, like emphatically. And there's new proposals coming out of the Republican-controlled Congress to radically reform student loans that will have mostly negative effects on borrowers, but it does depend on the type of borrower you are. So like basically the picture I'm painting is, borrowers were promised all these things by the Biden administration. Most of those promises, were not fulfilled, because, in large part because of Republican opposition, right? And then now we have like a new, unified party control of Washington that's going to be coming out with new rules, and people are really nervous and worried, and we can kind of like try to allay some of those fears on today's show, but it's understandable that borrowers are concerned right now.
Yeah, I mean, just that, for so many years, or the past 5 years, people were kind of got used to not including student loan repayment in their budgets because there was no real recourse, or they had that pause, and now it's coming back. So do you know if they have started to enforce that? Like, have you heard from people whose checks or have been garnished to have to pay back anything?
Well, they're right now notifying people that will be affected. So there's hundreds of thousands of people that are going to start garnishing like immediately. And, in my experience, the most common time they are able to intercept people for defaults is like tax refund time. So like that's especially for like lower income borrowers that struggle the most with making student loan payments, right? That have like the most challenging financial situations. Like a lot of lower income Americans get a whole lot of their kind of windfall money at tax time, right? Like you get that big tax refund from things like earned income tax credit, child tax credits, those kind of things. And that money often is like a few $1,000s. So it's a major deal for a lot of American families, right? And that is a sort of from the perspective of like the default collections machine that exists, that's like the perfect time to intercept that money is, for tax refund. So tax refund season mostly is already over. So a lot of people will notice it like from wage garnishments, but like even more people will notice it when they do tax refund seizures next year, if that makes sense. And that's
Right.
and that's definitely like a group of struggling borrowers, right? Is the people who can't really afford to make payments at all. There's other borrowers that can afford to make payments, but they're going to be impacted by just having like higher payments because of all this stuff going on with the save plan, right? Like the six figure. So student loan planner, helps. Like our services are most applicable to six figure borrowers. Our content is helpful to, I think, all borrowers, and the stuff that borrowers can do kind of depends on how much debt they have, right? You have different tools at your disposal if you've got different amounts of debt.
Well, and so I guess let's go back to, I know that, people, whether it's like private loans versus public, and we're talking about public loans that the federal government subsidized, correct? Like the private loans are separate. They have always kind of been on a different track.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, the only good news about private loans is they only write those loans if they think you can pay them back. Now, sometimes that's not right, like not correct. But like overall, usually private loans are underwritten, right? So it means that they thought you had the ability to pay them back. So a lot of times, what I see with private borrowers is they haven't thought about like restructuring their private loans. Like they can refinance them, they can get them on a longer term payment plan to get some payment relief. They can try to work with their cosigner because it's in their cosigner's interest to get the cosigner off the loan, right? So you try to work to get the cosigner off the loan to ease your finances and stuff. So there's solutions for private loans, but the better solutions are certainly for federal loans. So the better solutions, so anyone struggling right now, just go sign up for income-based repayment. Studentaid.gov/IDR, right? And get out of default, because they will seize the amount of the IBR payment anyway. So if they're going to seize that money from you anyway, you might as well get onto the IBR plan and voluntarily pay it and not wreck your credit. Right, because there's additional fees and collections fees that get added on if you're not paying. So that's my suggestion for people who are really struggling. Just go ahead and get enrolled in IBR. Your payment might even be zero for a lot of people, even with the current rules that exist.
So IBR, let's take a step back. That's income-based repayment program.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's going to be a percentage of calculation they do and say, oh, this is how much you can afford based on your income.
Right, and the most conservative proposal out there to reform student loans right now preserves this. So it's going to be preserved. Income-based repayment's going to be preserved. And so borrowers can feel confident if they're struggling that they can get access to this, right? And the question mark is going to be, what are they going to do to other borrowers? Because there's, the majority of borrowers are not in default, right? Like default's a significant percentage. It's like 10 to 15%. But, the majority are like in the SAVE plan forbearance, which was that affordable repayment plan promised by the Biden administration that's like in court litigation, right? So millions of people are stuck in that, and then millions of people are actively making payments under these different repayment plans. And so what Republicans are proposing, and it's still a long way from this bill being done, but what they're proposing is to consolidate every repayment plan from the past into just the old IBR plan. So the old IBR plan is just 15% of your income, and it's your discretionary income, which means you get a little bit of money you can make first before they take 15%. And that plan's been around since 2007. So that plan, has existed for quite some time. The impact on current borrowers if that plan were to pass is a lot of people are paying 10% of their income, right? So essentially, like this Republican plan wants to take people from 10 to 15% of income. So that would be like a 50% increase in people's payments, if that makes sense, right? And they're proposing a new plan. They're calling it the RAP plan, the Repayment Assistance Plan, like RAP. And that's what they're abbreviating as. The student loan abbreviation's always silly or weird, But so the RAP plan, the GOP IDR plan, I'll probably call it because it makes more sense when you call it that if you're listening to this, right? So the GOP IDR plan is proposed as 10% of income for 30 years if you want forgiveness. So essentially what they're trying to do is make it pretty hard to get forgiveness. If you're doing 10% of income for 30 years, that's going to be pretty hard to get something forgiven, right? Compared to 10% for 20 years, which is some of the best repayment plans available today. So I think borrowers would have to make the decision potentially, do I pay 15% of my income or should I try to pay 10% of my income for a longer period of time?
Right. And you're saying these are the only, well, this is what is being proposed.
This is what's being
Obviously, this can,
proposed.
years later, this can all change. If someone's listening to this in 2027 or even 2026. But right now, so what about the loans for federal workers, like if you work for like a
Public
nonprofit
service, right?
or, yeah.
Yeah, so public service loan forgiveness right now is still alive and well. They are talking about kind of reforming it instead of completely eliminating it, which, if you're looking for glass half full, that would be the glass half full, is that it's still going to be around. The question is how in what capacity, right? And to be honest, like in some ways, so this like Republican plan for student loans, like they actually are making some changes that would result in like reasonable payments for people with smaller balances. So I'll give you an example. Like this new GOP IDR plan is actually 1 to 10% of your income, depending on how much income you have. So if you make over 100,000 a year, it's 10% of your income. But if you make 50,000 a year, it's 5% of your income. So in some ways, like lower income, lower balance borrowers might have payments that are similar to the SAVE plan, actually, which offered like really, really good payments to a lot of people. And there are interest protections in this new plan that they're proposing. So, people's interest, if their payment doesn't cover their interest, the government would cover all their interest that's accruing. There's also a $600 per year principal subsidy as well. So if you make your payment, like certain borrowers below certain income levels would get $600 a year towards their student loans. So, pair that with the higher loan limits that are in the bill, where undergrads are able to borrow like slightly higher loan limits as well. This bill proposal would probably help undergrads some, but it would hurt graduate and professional borrowers and borrowers that have Parent Plus loans a lot. So hopefully that kind of makes sense, right? There's like winners and losers pretty much in most bills. And if I was going to like try to make it simple, it's kind of like if you're an existing borrower, this bill's probably bad for you if it passes. If you are a new borrower at the undergrad level, it's probably like mildly positive. And then if you are, a parent, it's probably also a negative for you. So, I mean, there's all kinds of uncertainty right now. I think one thing I would tell borrowers right now with student loans is like the overall rules for student loans actually are not going to change that much. When I say like overall rules for student loans, if you have less debt than your income, you probably need to pay it back. So the only question is how do you do that the most efficiently? And, if you're planning to pay back your student loans, you need to make sure you get loan interest subsidies first. So see if you're eligible for anything. A lot of people are, and they don't even realize it. So, for example, if you're like a new borrower, you might be able to get a low payment for a couple of years, get some interest subsidies before you try to pay a lot of it back, right?
So sorry, let's just jump in. How would you figure out if you had loan subsidies? Is there a web?
Yeah. So, like, here's an example. So this new plan that they're proposing would give you all of your, interest that's accruing above your required payment. The government would just pay for it, right? So if something like that was in place, first of all, a lot of people are on the SAVE plan forbearance due to these court litigations things, and those people are getting 0% interest currently. So if you're getting 0% interest currently, ride that out until that's gone, right? If you're a new borrower, though, and you have access to something like the RAP plan that does subsidize interest, a lot of people can file a tax return in their final year as a student, and their income's going to be pretty close to zero. And then if you time it right, you can use that to prove your income for your first year of payments and get very low payments that would result in you getting a lot of interest subsidies, if that makes sense, right? So that's an example of how, a recent grad might be able to get a pretty close to 0% interest rate if some of these proposals pass for a full year after their graduation. So if you get a 0% interest rate for a year, why would you go refinance with a private company, right? Get that 0%, build up your finances in your emergency fund, and then go refinance it and deal with it like, in a year or two. And so that's like people wanting to get interest subsidies. That people do need to think in general, okay, I got to pay down my debt if I have less than my income. And then if you've got like double your income in debt or more, so like, you make 100,000, but you got more than 200,000 in debt, you're a forgiveness case no matter what happens. Like no matter what happens in Washington with the rules, like you're still going for forgiveness. The only question is how much will you have to pay? And if you will have to pay 15% of your income instead of 10, then you're going to want to do some things to moderate how much taxable income you report, right? So there's some things you can do, like putting more money into retirement instead of your brokerage account, like doing pre-tax contributions to stuff instead of Roth contributions. And there, if you have a business, make sure you're like taking advantage of absolutely everything that you can write off humanly possible, right? And so there's ways to like minimize that taxable income that you show to pay less money. So those things are things you should do no matter what. And the urgency of doing those kind of planning things is more if the payment percentage of your income goes up, right? And then if you're somewhere in between, like if you have 1 to 2 times your income in debt, the reality is it depends. It depends on kind of like your goals, what risk tolerance you have, how ready you are to be done with all this mess. You might need to think about like, well, do I want to roll the dice and see how the 2028 election goes before I do anything? Maybe that's a good idea for some people, right? So you might like look into forbearance, you might look into the most affordable repayment option and just try to buy time to figure out like what the heck is going to happen long term. Because one thing I can tell people pretty confidently is if you have a one party like completely partisan bill like that's reforming student loans, it's not going to last very long. You know what I mean? Like, because it's all done by one party with no bipartisan consensus. So the next time, like, the Democrats are in charge completely, they're just going to completely undo everything the Republicans did. You know what I mean? So that means that, like, borrowers are faced with, like, more uncertainty than they ever really have been. And, I would just suggest that borrowers just sort of, like, try to stay calm through the storm, right? Like, and remember that there's, like, broad rules that still apply about, people that are extreme forgiveness cases before all this mess are still forgiveness cases. The only downside and problem that you could face is just, higher payments, which you can plan for if you're careful about it.
Right. And can you just share the website again? So I guess I'm thinking about a bunch of profiles of people listening. It's like the profile of someone who has no clue what's going on with their student loans, like has not even, I don't know if they just graduated or they just haven't looked. They're just like, I don't know what's going on. I don't even know where they are, how much it is. And then maybe the other profile of someone who kind of understands. I think that's who we're kind of directing to, kind of already is in some sort of repayment plan and what to do next. But I guess where do they go? What do they do next to figure out exactly where they stand?
Yeah, I mean, like, go to studentaid.gov and log in. And everybody can do this if you have a social security number. So go log in and then see what amount of debt you have. And, at least you'll know. At least you'll be like, oh, that's how much I have, right? And if it's below $50,000, I would go to studentaid.gov/IDR, and I would apply with that tool based off your current circumstances and just see if the payment's affordable. If the payment's affordable, then just sign up for it. Like, that's pretty straightforward, right? Less than $50K. You go to studentaid.gov, you apply for IBR, and you just see how much they're telling you owe. And if the payment looks okay to you, if the payment wouldn't bust your budget, just be like, sure, sounds good. At least you're not in default. At least you're not wrecking your credit. At least you're not going to cost yourself a ton of extra money in mortgage interest and car interest when you buy stuff because they're considering you a higher risk because you're hurting your credit from your student loans if you don't make payments at all, right? So that's like the person who doesn't know what the heck they're doing. If you owe like 50 to 100K, I would say same thing. Like, go to studentaid.gov, follow the same pathway, and just see if like you can afford that IBR payment. And if you cannot afford it and you have 50 to 100K, then I would think about like, well, why can you not afford it, right? Oftentimes, if you cannot afford it, that probably means you're making like a middle class income, because if you made a really low income, your payments would be zero, right? So if you like go and apply and you have like a modest amount of debt, like 50 to 100K of student debt, and you have a payment that's not affordable, it's probably not affordable because you have a middle class or income, but you like have lots of expenses, and those expenses might be totally legit. It might be, mortgage, it might be childcare, it might be car loan, right? Like, it might be real expenses, but ultimately you have to make a decision. Do I want to figure out a way where I can turn over the amount of money that I would have to pay under the IBR plan, or do I want the government to take it from me? And that's like always better if you just turn it over instead of the government trying to take it from you, because they'll get it, right? And so, but there's a lot of creative things that borrower could do to like help themselves. Like, they could see if they could refinance their mortgage to like a longer term to get a lower payment, right? They could maybe see if they have some cash somewhere, maybe a home equity loan that's longer term that they could use to pay off their car loan to free up some cash that way. Maybe childcare expense wise, maybe there's a creative option for childcare they haven't thought about, like having somebody with, that already has a child that would be willing to watch your child, for example, for a lower rate than what you'd pay like a nanny that doesn't have their own child they're watching. I don't know. So, just coming up with ideas, right? You just got to be creative to think, how do you possibly carve out some additional money to make that student loan payment? And then if somebody's got more than 100,000 of debt, they fall into usually one of two categories. Usually, if you have more than 100K of debt, you have a lot of education, right? And usually, you are a lot more aware of like your rights and what you can do because you have that education level. And so I would just say, like, if you have over 100K of loans, like, you could still follow that studentaid.gov path /IDR and apply for IBR and see if the payment's okay. And if for the most money avoidant people listening to this, I think that's probably good enough. Like, that's probably good enough, at least for a while. Like, you'll probably pay more than you need to, but at least it protects your finances. But for people that have 100K and up of debt that, have decent incomes and could afford a few $100s, like, that's kind of our sweet spot of where we can help people, because we can almost always, not every time, but almost always cover our few $100 consult fee by just like finding things people are missing, like, filing an extension on their taxes, or, filing separately instead of jointly, or, redoing like retirement contributions to where there's more pre-tax contributions instead of after-tax ones. So those are some like kind of different levels of help that people could get. And if people still want the free help instead of the paid help, like, we also have the Student Loan Planner podcast where we go into some of these strategies that people are, if they really can't afford anything at all.
Yeah, and I think ultimately you can't not pay them anymore, basically. You have to, you can't get away with that anymore. So you do have to figure out what's going on and make some sort of payment, or make the payment based on whether it's, like you said, the income-based repayment program. And I do want to go back, and we'll talk about like what happens when someone like does a consult with you, and like who you already kind of talked about who the profile fits for that, but just want to also go back to the people who are working in as teachers, as service workers, or federal workers. Like, I want to go back to make sure that if they're in that scenario, they are using the forgiveness that's available to them. So can we just quickly touch base on that and what those people should be doing?
Yeah, so you want to go to studentaid.gov /PSLF and apply if you haven't already. And if it's been a while since you've told the government about your work, you go do it again, studentaid.gov /PSLF. And there's a lot of people, because of those adjustments the Biden administration made, that are a lot closer to forgiveness nowadays than there used to be. And a lot of people have been stuck on this save plan forbearance that are eligible for PSLF, the forgiveness. The public workers that have not been able to get onto a plan that will allow them to get forgiveness. They've been stuck. They've been literally unable to switch plans to get something that could count. And so those people need to think about switching plans. So go to studentaid.gov /IDR to switch into the income-based repayment plan, IBR, right? And then that'll get them additional credit towards forgiveness and get the clock started again. And the other thing they need to consider is whether or not they're eligible for something called PSLF buyback. So this is another Biden-era program that came out that allowed people to buy back periods of time they were stuck in forbearance instead of repayment. And like, there's a lot of rules that are about to come out that we don't know yet what they're going to say about what the new administration will respect that. But, they have initially said some positive things about maybe respecting that program. So, a lot of people should at least throw their hat in the ring and try to apply just to see if they might be able to qualify, if that makes sense.
Right. And again, you have to be a public worker. So the examples I gave, like a teacher or work like at a nonprofit.
Right. And the problem is the new administration is kind of like coming after certain kinds of public workers that qualify for PSLF, right? So there's going to be litigation over this. Luckily, it, to me so far, sounds like mostly like headline grabbing type of restrictions versus things that would make a huge difference to a huge number of people. What I mean by that is, like, they're trying to target folks that work at like immigration nonprofits, right? Like things that don't align with their policies. And so far it seems like that would affect a fairly limited, number of public workers over compared to the overall number of public workers. But that's something that's like worth monitoring, right? Like, there are some proposals out there to like eliminate hospitals' nonprofit status, for example, that could have a hugely negative impact on people getting PSLF. Another group of people that would be big losers for this bill if it passes would be physicians in particular. Like the bill would pretty much eliminate the ability of physicians in the future, not current physicians, but future physicians would be completely unable to get public service loan forgiveness in the future. So there are some pretty interesting changes that they're proposing. And if I'm a borrower, one of the few kind of comfort points that I'd have is that the Senate has no idea what they want. So the Senate is really far apart from the House, and there's not been a lot of discussion about how those two different sides come together. And both of those bodies are held by Republicans, but the Senate Republicans are subject to a little bit more moderation than the House, right? Because the typical House member and for the Republican caucus comes from a very, very conservative district, 20% more Republicans than Democrats or something like that, right? And the typical senator in the Republican caucus maybe comes from 5% more Republicans than Democrats type of place, right? So I would expect the Senate version of the student loan reforms coming out to look more moderate than the House, and then the two sides have to negotiate over what they want to do. And so it's just going to be a wild few months for borrowers.
And when does this bill go up, or when will we have more information about it if it gets passed?
So I predict that we'll know for sure by September 30th. That's when I think we'll know for sure whether or not we're going to see any big legislative reforms. And I think that we will probably see, a bill that we think might go forward probably in July. So that's probably kind of the timeline. But I do want to encourage borrowers, if these changes that I'm talking about would hurt you, contact your elected representatives, right? A lot of people are asking me, what can I do right now? One of those things is share your opinion on legislation. This is your right as a voter. Contact your congressperson, your senator, maybe both senators and your congressperson. That's all three of people who elect you people who represent you at the federal level, and tell them how you would be negatively impacted if these things changed, right? One of the things that I'm really concerned about is the loan limits proposed in this new legislation. They're only going to let loan limits be $150,000 for professional school, total lifetime limits, right? So if you think about somebody coming from a first generation family that's trying to go to medical school, living expenses alone are $30K a year for medical school, because you got to pay for rent, medical insurance, right? Food, all these things, right? So $30K times 4, well, that's $120,000. And so does medical school cost $30K over 4 years? No. Medical school tends to cost $40K per year, or more. And so you're talking about, needing to borrow way more than the loan limits they're proposing. And so that could really seriously negatively impact first generation, second generation, lower income families from being able to attend the most, prestigious degree programs like law school, medical school, et cetera. So that's
Right.
one of my biggest concerns in the bill's proposal, but that could change as the Senate, takes up the bill.
Yeah, and I just wonder, just as an aside, does that force the universities to rethink how they are, charging and how much they're charging if they don't have people who can afford, even through loans, and can't even get loans? It's because of these limits,
Yeah.
the tuition.
There's legit conversations to be had about that, though, right? It's very silly to have a loan rule that says schools can set the price and they can charge you as much as they want. That's dumb, right? At a minimum, if we're trying to preserve access, there should be some regulations on the schools, so we're if they're going to do federal loans, they can't charge you anything. Right now, I was visiting New York with some friends, and we were walking down near Times Square, and there's this private university that has a gorgeous campus right near Times Square, and it's huge and enormous, and it's the only reason that campus is in prime office real estate, beautiful location, is because they're charging borrowers 2 or 3x what they should be charging them for their degrees, because they know they can make the borrowers pay it on an income-based plan, right? So that's not good for anybody. It's not good for the borrowers. It's not good for the the taxpayers, of course, who include student loan borrowers. Student loan borrowers are taxpayers too, right? So the current system we have is definitely not optimal. But the concern is, how do you balance having some regulation on the schools, having more reasonable loan limits without hurting first generation, second generation students that just frankly aren't going to be able to get private loans like in the same way that like, a wealthy family would be able to, right? Like if you have to go through a private underwriting, a lower income student might not qualify for enough private loans to be able to attend in the first place. So those are
Right.
some of like the big questions that that sort of make me wonder or be concerned for folks for the future.
Travis, please tell everyone more about just like your services, what you can do for journeyers who have more questions and who this would be best for.
Yeah, if you're a journeyer with more than 100,000 of student loans, we're the spot for you. If you want clarity, less anxiety, understanding what's going on, in terms of like when is a good time to book, like you could book really at any time, I think up to like 60 days out. So if you wanted to just like reserve a spot for July where we'll have a copy of that final bill, that'd be fine. If you know that you're super confused right now with your recertification date and your, payment with your servicer and you have no idea what you qualify for anymore, like now would be a good time. The cost is a few $100. It's $5.95 on our website, but Journey to Launch folks get it for $100 off that with your affiliate link. So it's studentloanplanner.com/journey to launch, and that's all one word, journey to launch. And if you wanted to kind of double check that we are good at what we do, you could just like Google like student loan planner reviews. And you'll see a lot of stuff from like Reddit. You'll see like 3,800 reviews from the past nearly 10 years we've been doing this. And so I think that, reading some of those reviews might give folks comfort that like, besides the fact that you're willing to have me on your podcast, that we do, I can't say 100% of the time find savings, but, 95% of the time. And the savings, when we find savings, are pretty enormous, like, 5 figures on average. Because we're dealing with people with a lot of debt. So, yeah, if people are interested in getting a clear plan and understanding all of the potential things that might happen with student loans and to understand how it would impact you and your finances and your financial planning, that's who we help. So it's just a 1-hour consult with our expert team. And then they get several months of email follow-up after that where they can ask follow-up questions if anything like happens with like a new bill, a new plan, something like that. So yeah, the link again is studentloanplanner.com/journey to launch.
Yes, I will link all that in the episode show notes. I mean, but really, like you've been on episode and we've known each other for quite some time now. And I value your expertise in this. And there's not like a lot of people that like I like doing affiliate stuff with. But I'm
Yeah, I
like, no, Travis
understand.
knows what he's doing. And every time that I've had someone go to you and use the link or just say, okay, I need more information, and take the investment and, want to do that, like it works out for them. So I would encourage you, if you do fall into this category of you need the help and you're willing to, pay an expert to help you, to look more into Travis's work. And please tell everyone more about the podcast and where they can just follow you in general for general tips and overall information on student loans.
Yeah, Student Loan Planner podcast is the number one spot. If you're super anxious as a student loan borrower, you're freaking out about all these changes, you want to follow along weekly with what's happening with all of the proposed changes and how it's going to impact you. So, if you are looking for, a podcast that'll keep you up to date on student loans, that's a great spot. Also on studentloanplanner.com, if you sign up to our email list, we send out a once a week email explaining on what's happening with student loans. If you're not as much of a auditory person, I'll assume most of the people listening to this love listening to podcasts, right? But you can also get the updates that we send out via the email list as well. So you've got pretty much I would recommend to people who are not wanting to just hit the easy button and say figure it out for me. The two free options is the Student Loan Planner podcast, which is available anywhere you found this podcast, right? And then the email list, which you can sign up for at studentloanplanner.com. We actually give out like some freebies, like, repayment calculators, things that model the new GOP plan, things like that.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Travis, for coming back on the show and giving us all this great information.
Thanks for having me.